Hello, this is Philosophy 67, and this is week four for us in our in the semester. Uh, the end, the last week of part one, right, of the class, which is called Sovereign Power and Dialectical Subversions. Again, we started with Hobbes, some chapters from Leviathan that we had a chance to speak about together in class, face to face, and also week two we met right when we did on week two we spoke about sovereignty and the political in Carl Schmitt, right? Then last time I uploaded a short video about Hegel and the so-called dialectic of master and slave, and today we speak about Marx. The syllabus says that right what you should read is the section called estranged labor or alienated labor, and also the section private property and communism from the economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, as well as the thesis on Feuerbach and the first chapter of the Communist Manifesto. In any case, I will say a few things about the first two readings, okay, Strange Labor and Private Property and Communism, also because the journal entry for you, the suggestion that I put on in the syllabus and on Blackboard is from those texts. Okay, so in any case, if you go to your text, the Strange Labor is about 10 pages from economic and philosophical manuscripts, right? You go to page especially 37, and when right, I mean. Basically when you find the sentence we shall start out from a present day economic fact, that's where it begins, right, being important. I read a few lines, okay, from Marx again from this text and from the next one as well. Okay, so Marx says the worker becomes poorer, more poor, the more wealth he produces, the more his production increases in power and extent. The worker becomes an even cheaper commodity, the more commodities he produces. Right, and then the devaluation of the human world grows in direct proportion to the increase in value of the world of things. Labor, and this is what I want to emphasize now, labor not only produces commodities, it also produces itself and the workers as a commodity, and it does so in the same proportion in which it produces commodities in general. Okay, this is a very important point. We can't really go in depth into that. We can't, for example, address now the way in which in Capital, Volume 1 of Capital, he speaks about the commodity, but the commodity is right, by and large, is anything that can be sold and bought. It is for Marx something that has within, that contains both use value and exchange value. Use value is the use that you make, like a book, you read it, and then exchange value is precisely the economic value of any commodity. Now, labor itself also becomes a commodity, right? It is a commodity like all others, but also a special commodity because it produces all other commodities as well. And in doing so, it produces itself. That's the work also, not simply of a production, but of a reproduction. In any case, in doing so, then we enter, and I had to be very simplistic here, but we enter the discourse, the phenomenon of alienation, right? Loss of reality. Alienation, both because, the object that the worker produces does not belong to the worker, it is taken away from the worker, it belongs to capital, to the capitalist, to the company, and so on. And also because alienation, because there must be this moment of distancing of oneself from oneself when if one works does something which is not meaningful, which is meaningless, and so on, then the cost of this at the existential level is also the one has to take distance from oneself. Okay, so you will find all these things in this wonderful section. Maybe what I want to read is also this passage that it's almost repeated twice in the same way. I have a different text, but if you go to page this one page what is the pages are page 37. Okay, so then you find actually in italics, right, speaking about the estrangement or alienation. Alienation, by the way, means alien, right, from the Latin means other. Okay, so that something becomes other. I become a different person from myself, other. But again, this alienation has to do both with the fact that my work, which is also my time, my energy, and so on, is going to end up in the products that I make, in the commodity, and also because, again, I no longer belong to myself. I am no longer, you know, the real agent in the production process. So he says on page 37, the more the worker produces, the less he has to consume, he or she, that's gendered language. The more value he creates, the more worthless he becomes. The more his product is shaped, the more misshapen the worker, the more civilized his object, the more barbarous the worker, the more powerful the work, the more powerless the worker, the more intelligent the work, the duller the worker, and the more he becomes a slave of nature. Okay, so think about these ideas here that are very important, right? And so write something about this. And then he also says later on that that's basically the nucleus of the concept of alienation, when he says that the activity of the worker, right, is not their own spontaneous activity. It belongs to another. It is the loss of their own self. The loss of one's own self, this is what alienation is. Again, not only at the point of production, not only in the economic sense, but also and more importantly, in general, at the existential sense, the existential level. Okay, so in any case, what I want to do is also go to the other um, section from the economic and philosophical manuscripts that I asked you to read, right? Private Property and Communism, and read this important, very important passage from page what? 6 of this section, I believe. Okay. What is it? Okay, so this is actually, yes, page 7, when where Marx says this. Okay, private. This is the second paragraph on the page. Private property. This is private property and communism. Okay, private property has made us so stupid and one-sided that an object is only ours when we have it, when it exists for us as capital, or when we directly possess it, drink, wear, inhabit it, etc. In short, when we use it. Although private property conceives of all these immediate realizations of possession only as a means of life, and the life they serve is the life of a private property, labor, and capitalization. This goes back some how also to the question of alienation. So there is what I want you to also pay attention to is this important concept and really wonderful concept of the question of the senses and the emancipation of the senses, emancipation of the senses that comes with, Marx says, the supersession of private property, which would be communism. Okay, so he says, I skip one paragraph, a few lines, and then actually, I should read that as well. Therefore, all the physical and the intellectual senses, the body in general, right? The body, the mind, as part, of course, of the body. Then we'll speak more about this. Have been replaced by the simple alienation, the simple estrangement of all these senses, the sense of having. What becomes important then in the system of capital is precisely to have, to accumulate, and so on and so forth, and not, existence as such, not to be. And this is absolute poverty, Marx says. Okay, so in any case, the supersession, he continues, of private property is therefore the complete emancipation of all human senses and attributes. But it is this emancipation precisely because these senses and attributes have become human, subjectively as well as objectively. The eye has become a human eye, just as its object has become a social human object made by man for man. The senses have therefore become theoreticians in their immediate praxis. I don't know if this is clear, but in any case, there is here also a very important uh, attention to the question of the body, right? And from the philosophical point of view, the important question of the relationship between the body and what in some traditions is not the body, the mind, the soul, and so on and so forth. But here we have Marx saying that the senses are now theoreticians in their immediate praxis. Okay, we can't go into that now, but in another work by Marx, there is this important concept of the general intellect. Okay, in the work is called Grundrisse, and and also the idea of what, with the supersession of private property, right? What might be the true, real wealth of a society, which is no longer money, which in the system of capital, and especially today with the financialization of everything, whatever money is, we can't go into that now. It's a complex thing, but it is that's what wealth is. The accumulation of commodity and ultimately money and so on. But in reality, Marx says the real wealth is time, free time, disposable time, the time to engage in meaningful rather than meaningless, right, spontaneous and important rather than alienated activities. Okay, so well, in any case, this is very. I mean, this is overly simplistic in many ways, but I ask you to write again. Remember, do the journal entry weekly. Okay, give a description, give a sense what your understanding is of what Marx says about the conditions of alienated labor and alienated life, the loss of the self, and also how can you relate this to Hegel, what we saw in Hegel, and what is this precisely idea in Marx of the emancipation of the senses? It is a way in which you can think of this also in the sense of the body taking in the framework of the history of philosophy. We are not going to be able to go into that now, but taking central stage. Okay, so the body, the senses becoming theoreticians. Think about this distinction between theory and praxis. What the relationship between theory, right, to think, to see things, and praxis, to do, right, is and how they can also belong to one another, and what that can be in relation to this statement by Marx that the senses, therefore the body, the senses become theoreticians in the immediate praxis. Okay. All right, so see you next time. I mean, I can finish by saying you can also relate these to one of precisely that I asked you to read as well, the thesis on Feuerbach, where typically Marx says the philosophers have interpreted the world in many ways. The point, however, is to change it, right? I mean, if you go to the thesis on Feuerbach, then you will look for thesis 11, which is the last one, okay? Again, and you can relate that as well to your entry in your journal. Okay, so, I will add another video with a kind of summary of this first part of the class, right? Sovereign power and dialectical subversions, and then next week we'll enter the second part of the class. Okay, week 5. Okay, thank you. Bye.